Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to the Bonneville Power Administration's first quarterly business review of fiscal year 2018. I'm Scott Sims, Director of Communications, and on behalf of all of us at BPA, we're glad you can join us for this redesigned QBR today. BPA Administrator Elliot Mainzer will be sharing more information in a moment on why the QBR redesign is an important turning point for BPA. First, though, just a few housekeeping items for today's forum. This QBR presentation is being shared via WebEx. The WebEx link is available on our event calendar at bpa.gov. If you're having trouble accessing WebEx, the slide deck is also available at bpa.gov/go-to/QBR. So most of you experienced a conference call interrupted by background noise at some point in your career. Today, in consideration of that, we have placed all phones on mute for the presentation portion of this meeting. Questions can be submitted at any time today, but they will not be answered until the presentation is complete. To submit a question, click the chat button on the upper right-hand part of your screen. Enter your question and press send. Your question will be sent to the BPA host. Today, we will start with Administrator Elliot Mainzer, who will be covering the 2018 to 2023 strategic plan that has just been published this morning. And then you'll hear from senior executives to get updates on finance, power, and transmission. We will close today with a brief update from Deputy Administrator Dan James on where we are with the spill surcharge. Then we will open up the meeting to questions. It's now my distinct pleasure to turn it over to Elliot for the unveiling of BPA's new strategic plan.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us this morning, and I'm of course, very excited to share with you an overview of our new 2018 to 2023 strategic plan, which, as Scott said, hits the street this morning. So it's a big milestone for us, a tremendous amount of effort, not only here within Bonneville, but really appreciate all the input we got across the region. I mean, everybody that contributed to this plan, our customers, tribes, all of our friends and state organizations, members of the congressional delegation, really just an incredible amount of constructive feedback that really helped and sharpen this plan, make it much better and much focused. And I just wanted to start out by thanking all of you for helping us get to this important moment. But before we turn to strategy, I'd like to start with culture. At Bonneville, we're working really hard to create a safe, positive, and inclusive work environment where people feel valued, enabled, and ultimately accountable for delivering results. And that accountability starts at the top. And that's why we decided to redesign the quarterly business review to create an opportunity for me and the other members of my senior executive team to report out on our business performance and progress on meeting our strategic objectives. And by focusing on a set of key performance indicators and keeping our eye on the bigger picture, we can provide customers and constituents with the visibility and transparency they need to monitor our commercial performance and progress in meeting our strategic objectives without necessarily getting pulled into the weeds and distracting Bonneville from its responsibility to run the business on a day-to-day basis. This sense of accountability, of course, must also be shared across the agency. And I'm pleased to note that we are joined on the call this morning by over 350 of our managers who are assembled at the Oregon Convention Center for our winter all-managers meeting. So hello to our management team as well. Really happy to have them on the call. Going forward, at each QBR, I'll plan to start out with the state of the business, reporting on the key relevant issues that you all need and want to know about. And then you'll hear from senior executives to get updates on finance, power, and transmission, as well as other important initiatives that are central to our business performance. The things we're reporting out on will be connected to Bonneville's new strategic plan, which is now officially available at www.bpa.gov/strategic plan. I'm going to be giving you an overview of the plan this morning, and in future QBRs, my State of the Business updates will focus on issues associated with our strategic goals. Now, I will say that my overview of the plan this morning is a fairly high-level overview, and I really see it as the first installment on what I expect to be much greater engagement with customers and others in the months ahead on the content of the plan and how we intend to meet our objectives. So turning to slide 5, for those of you who are on the WebEx or anybody looking at this electronically, you see there it is, the official cover of our strategic plan. The Bonneville 2018 to 23 strategic plan, which is subtitled Delivering on Our Public Responsibilities to a commercially successful business. And again, I want to thank all the folks who have helped us develop this document. I'm particularly pleased to see how it really highlights our people and their role in delivering on our mission and developing relationships with our customers and stakeholders throughout the region. Now, it's interesting, I was reflecting the other day, it's kind of hard for me to believe that in April, I will have been at Bonneville for 16 years. The years are starting to fly by. And, you know, as long as I've been at Bonneville, we've operated from a vision of BPA as an engine of the region's economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. And as those of you will see, that really is the starting point, the heart and soul of where we start from at BPA, delivering on that vision and delivering on our role within the Northwest of providing low rates, reliability, responsible environmental stewardship, and accountability to the region. Now, many of you have been involved in dialogue with us for the last couple of years, stretching back to the Focus 2018 initiative a couple of years ago, where we started to see some significant signs of risk and challenge to Bonneville's commercial performance. I'm not going to go into a really detailed review of all those fundamentals right now, but certainly the wholesale electricity markets, big development of variable renewable resources, challenges, costs of aging infrastructure, evolving and rapidly changing markets and technology. All of these have put quite a bit of stress, certainly on our power side and even our transmission business line, as they've seen the cost of new infrastructure grow and the system become increasingly constrained, has placed a lot more focus on meeting customer needs and being a more agile, responsive organization. And so the plan, which has 4 main objectives, which I'm going to get into shortly, is really focused on actions that we're going to be taking over the next 5 years to be more competitive and responsive to customer needs, to leverage and enable industry change through modernized assets and system operations, and to ultimately deliver on our public responsibilities through a commercially successful business. That really is the heart and soul of what we're trying to do. And this plan and the actions that I'm about to lay out for you is going to be the central reference point for everything we are doing at BPA in the coming 5 years, potentially beyond. We're going to get really focused on these actions and these objectives. So as you turn to the next slide, slide 8, I want to just briefly pause by mentioning we recognize that when you embark on a plan like this, it's really important. I'm sorry, did I say, yeah, that's 6 or 8? 6, excuse me, slide 6. Got to get my glasses adjusted here. When you embark on a strategic plan of this magnitude, it's really important that you know how you're going to measure success. And you stick really closely, again, to those key performance indicators. And so throughout this presentation today and in the document itself, you're going to see this symbol for our key performance indicators. These are the measures that Bonneville will be monitoring as key indicators of its performance. And they're also the measures that our senior executives will be reporting out on regularly at future QBRs. Now, not all of them will be reported quarterly, since some will only change annually, but today we'll be walking through all of them, and there are 12, to provide a baseline of where we are today and to describe where we're going. For those of you who have access to the plan, you'll see all 12 of them detailed on pages 52 and 53 of the plan. Turning to slide 7, I'm going to be moving into our first fundamental strategic goal, and that is to strengthen our financial health. You know, it's interesting. I've had lots of dialogue with many of you in the region. Some folks would say that, strengthening your financial health isn't necessarily a strategic objective, but this focus and these actions that we're taking do represent significant change in strategic thinking for BPA. And our focus on our financial plan and our strengthening our financial health is really a fundamental underpinning of this whole strategic plan. As a matter of fact, you'll see it's the most detailed and extensive version of the plan. It will also be followed next week by the formal release of our 2018 financial plan. And I just can't emphasize enough how important we see really taking care of improving our cost management discipline and taking care of our balance sheet. So the first objective within this section on strengthening our financial health is really to improve our cost management discipline. And the specific objective detailed within the plan is to hold the sum of program costs by business line at or below the rate of inflation through 2028. And this slide here on slide 7 details the makeup of our program costs and percentage basis for both our power services and transmission services organizations. So for those of you who participated in our IPR process over the years and have given us the feedback that we need to move away from your sort of classic bottoms-up type of approach, we're going to be changing that IPR experience significantly. We're going to be starting with specific cost management targets for each IPR. We'll be articulating those, and we'll be managing to much more of a top-down, target-based approach. We'll try to be very responsive to what we've heard from our customers, and at the end of the day, we know that that long-standing pattern of rate increases and cost increases that we've seen over the last 10 years is not sustainable, and we have to change that starting now. And I'll come back to that a little bit more in the power section. The second element of our financial health segment of cost management is also focused on capital investments and making sure that the life cycle cost and value of assets is based on industry-leading standards. I'll come back to that. But the second major component of our financial health objective is to build financial resiliency. And what I mean by financial resiliency is the ability of an organization to withstand disruptive events that impact revenues or expenses while allowing the organization to continue to deliver on its mission. And we're going to be seeking to build financial resiliency through objectives for debt utilization, debt capacity, and liquidity. On the term debt utilization describes how Bonneville uses debt to fund capital investments and how Bonneville repays that debt. Our first goal in this area is to achieve a debt-to-asset ratio of 75 to 85% within 10 years, and to trend towards 60 to 70% in the long term. We'll be talking a lot more about this in the weeks ahead. Mary will talk about it a little bit more during this period, but this is a very important goal as we attempt to delever a bit and to have a more sustainable debt-to-asset ratio for BPA. The second area is in the realm of debt capacity. And the specific objective in the area of debt capacity is to maintain sufficient debt capacity to fund Bonneville's capital program on a rolling 10-year basis and to preserve $1.5 billion of available financing from the U.S. Treasury. And we're going to have to move beyond our traditional source of debt financing in order to have a sustainable long-term approach to investing in the system. So we talk about that as an all-of-the-above financing strategy. And the third area is a focus on liquidity. And our goal in this area is to maintain a minimum of 60 days cash on hand for each business line and maintain a 97.5% annual Treasury payment probability. This, again, is another topic I know is of significant interest to customers. We'll be expounding on it a little bit more and focusing on it in workshops and other forms of rate case engagement coming forward. But we really believe that this element of financial resiliency is extremely important, and we're very committed to focusing on it. And then ultimately, and the fourth objective, is to try to maintain high investment-grade credit ratings excuse me, from all three of the rating agencies. That's just so important for an organization like Bonneville, who is investing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in its assets to both sustain and modernize our asset portfolio. So that concludes the summary of our first objective, to strengthen financial health. Our second major strategic goal is to modernize our assets and system operations. And this starts with administering an industry-leading asset management program. I think many of you have seen over the last couple of years, we've significantly raised the bar within BPA for our approach to asset management. We've hired an agency asset manager who reports directly to our chief operating officer. We've put all 5 of our major asset categories, our power, transmission, IT, facilities, fish and wildlife, on a common economic metric so we can efficiently allocate capital between those assets. And we're going to make sure that we understand our assets' criticality, health, and risks, establish risk-based asset performance objectives, such as loss generation reliability, and make sure that we're using leading analytical methods to prioritize maintenance activities and capital investments for safe, reliable asset performance. We have to be incredibly good at asset management in order to invest wisely in this system, and we're committed to doing so. The second objective under modernizing assets and system operations is to modernize the federal power and transmission system operations and supporting technology. I think we're all aware of the changes that are happening around us with new technology, new markets, and these create both significant challenges and opportunities. And we're going to be working from a 5-year grid modernization roadmap for the federal system that's going to position Bonneville, like some of the other utilities in the region, to be able to both leverage and enable industry change to support more reliable, efficient, and economical system operations. This is going to be a huge lift from Bonneville, but you're going to hear us talking a lot and moving out shortly on a significant grid modernization initiative. We then move into our third major strategic goal, which is to provide competitive power products and services. If you look at slide 10, this is a graph I've become extremely familiar with in the last couple of years, and something that our customers and others have pointed out to us multiple times. And this graph shows our priority firm power rates from 2010 and the trend towards 2020. And it shows the varying directions of our rates as opposed to market prices. And although it's certainly true that a direct comparison of the Bonneville power products with market prices is not necessarily a perfect apples to apples comparison, because there are certainly attributes of our power products that are not fully captured within wholesale market prices. It is also very true that if these trends continue, if the trend of our upward rate trajectory continues, and we find ourselves significantly out of the money come the middle of the next decade, we have a major competitiveness problem on our hands, and this is a trend we have to address right now. When you look at our strategy for providing more competitive power products and services, we start with a clear recognition that we're not going to entirely cost manage our way out of this situation. We have to look for new revenue opportunities as well. We have to grow the top line. And we have to look for ways so our first objective is to increase power revenues through new market opportunities for clean capacity. And we're going to be very, very active in this marketplace. It's already starting now with some transactional opportunities. We have a new Senior Vice President, Joel Cook, who's very, very engaged on this topic and leveraging the full capability of our power organization to increase the power revenue base. And this also requires us, as we articulate in Objective 3B, to address the market and regulatory barriers to capturing the clean energy and capacity value of the federal Columbia River power system. You know, we need to make sure that as new energy policies are articulated, that the reliable, flexible, and low-carbon federal Columbia power system is appropriately valued in these emerging energy policies, because the region's existing hydro resources can play an essential role in meeting greenhouse gas emissions goals at the lowest total cost while also maintaining reliability objectives. So we're going to stay very engaged on this topic. Our third objective, Objective 3C in the plan, is to prioritize our fish and wildlife investments based on biological effectiveness and mitigation for FCRPS impacts, and to manage our fish and wildlife program costs at or below the rate of inflation, inclusive of new obligations and commitments. As you see in this plan, we articulate right out front that protecting, mitigating, and enhancing the region's natural resources that were impacted by the development of the federal hydro system is an important and intrinsically valuable goal in its own right, and it's also legally required. We take this public responsibility extremely seriously, but we see we do not have the capacity commercially to continue taking larger and larger rate increases. And as with all of our other programs across the organization, we need to make sure that we're really prioritizing our fish and wildlife investments as effectively as possible and making sure that the upward pressure on rates is managed. And we have to do this. This involves some significant trade-offs and prioritizations. It's hard work, but it's work that we together as the region have to accomplish. The fourth area turns to the topic of energy efficiency. Again, as we say in the plan, the development and acquisition of energy efficiency savings is one of the most important achievements and legacies of Bonneville and its customers over the past 38 years. But again, we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on our bottom line and commercial success, and making sure that energy efficiency and demand response investments are aligned with the long-term needs of BPA and its customers. I want to just a little bit more color on this, knowing this is such an important topic. And we will work collaboratively with the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, our customers, and regional public interest organizations to ensure that BPA meets statutory obligations. However, our investments will be more closely guided by Bonneville's power and transmission system needs and the imperatives of competitiveness and long-term commercial performance. And then finally, we have objective 3E is to modernize the Columbia River Treaty. And I'm quite encouraged that we're starting to see the beginnings of the negotiations between the United States and Canada. Our strategic goal, number 4, cuts right to the heart of Bonneville's role as a transmission service provider. And it talks about something that we've heard clearly from our customers as well. And so strategic goal 4 is to meet transmission customer needs efficiently and responsibly. Our customers have time and again asked us now for greater clarity on how to access additional transmission service. And I think we've responded in the appropriate way, starting out with objective 4A, which is to address load service, congestion, and new transmission service requests by using flexible, scalable, cost-effective, and efficient solutions. This was most clearly demonstrated by our decision last year not to build the I-5 corridor reinforcement project and committing Bonneville to this more efficient and scalable path. The second focus within transmission, and again, all of us will have to contribute to these objectives, is to develop and implement policies, pricing, and procedures for regional planning that incentivize grid optimization and efficient regional resource development. Objective 4C, and I want to make sure that our network integration customers hear this loud and clear because this is a very, very important dialogue, is to meet the current and future needs of network integration transmission service customers through clear business practices and streamlined processes. Finally, and a topic that I know has, again, been of significant interest to the region, has to do with the alignment of Bonneville's tariff with the preferred pro forma. And so objective 4D is to offer more standardized products and services by better aligning Bonneville's open access transmission tariff with pro forma and industry best practices. And I'm very pleased to see already that our transmission service organization and all the other supporting orgs within Bonneville have already begun rolling out on the transmission of tomorrow, getting ahead of the curve on these issues, and also already very, very engaged with the region. I really appreciate the work. The changes in transmission are going to involve significant culture change, and that leadership team and all the folks across the agency are really committed to a much more efficient and responsive customer service experience for our transmission customers. So I want to thank them for getting ahead of that. So finally, I want to turn to the next slide, and I'm going to run just a few more minutes, folks, before I turn it over to the other members of the team. And that gets to the issue of strategy and culture, and I talked about that in the beginning. And I've really, as I've said to my people here at Bonneville, my biggest learning as an administrator, and something I'm sure my friends who are managing utilities across the region can completely relate to, is the fact that a good business strategy achieves nothing without the people and culture to make it happen. And it's the reason why we have placed so much emphasis here at Bonneville in fostering a safe, positive, inclusive work environment where our people feel valued and enabled to deliver results. And as you'll see in the plan, everything here at Bonneville starts with safety. And our culture really is rooted in safety. And I just feel so strongly that if you're able to develop a strong safety culture, there are so many positive behaviors and attributes that derive from that, and we're going to continue investing in leadership, diversity, and ultimately creating the kind of culture that helps Bonneville successfully deliver on this plan. So I just have a couple more minutes. I'd like to just recap a couple of things, and I know we're moving just a little bit long, but I think it's really important. One of the big questions I get from folks, both internally and externally at Bonneville, is what's going to be different about this plan. I think many of you who've been actively engaged with us on the development of this strategy in the last few years probably recognize a number of these issues. I certainly hope you recognize the focus on cost management and competitiveness and responsiveness, and the financial elements are just foundational. But ultimately, what's going to be different? So I want to just recap. The first thing you're going to see from Bonneville is much greater focus and prioritization around strategic objectives. This plan is going to serve as the central reference point for everything we're doing over the next 5 years. It will be the basis of business unit operating plans, asset management plans, and performance incentives. The second thing is we're going to have, and I've emphasized it, I want to emphasize it again, much greater cost management and budgeting discipline. We're committing to manage total program costs by business line at or below the rate of inflation through 2028. This is going to take a lot of hard work and will force us to carefully scrutinize all of our business activities and processes to ensure we're maximizing the value of the system, supporting and investing in the revenue-generating parts of the business, and eliminating work that does not advance our strategic priorities. The third area is you're going to see much greater rigor around asset management. And this is going to include taking a hard look at the economic value proposition around all of our assets to determine if they are producing sustainable returns for Bonneville and our customers, especially with new and emerging needs. The fourth area is that we are really taking on an extremely ambitious grid modernization strategy that's going to engage many, if not all, parts of the agency. This strategy will help us to extract more value from our existing power and transmission assets and prepare Bonneville to be a more active player in the Western energy markets. I can tell you this is going to be a very, very large amount of change, both internally and externally. We need to stay very connected on it. We're also going to be, as I said, aggressively seeking new market opportunities for clean hydro capacity and supporting efforts to fully capture flexible carbon-free power in the regional power markets. This is going to serve as a short-term hedge against continued depressed wholesale energy prices and open up new long-term sales opportunities post-2028 if we experience significant load loss or customer diversification. Joel and his team and all of us across Bonneville are going to really have to dig in to look for these new opportunities. That's going to be a different experience. Sixth is a dramatically improved customer service experience and lower transaction costs of doing business with transmission services organizations, as well as that more flexible, scalable, and economically and operationally efficient approach to meeting requests for new transmission capacity. I want to emphasize that's different than today, and we expect to be demonstrating that on a continuous basis. The last couple items to mention a workforce that feels valued and is motivated and aligned around the fundamental importance and urgency with that sense of accountability for delivering on our public responsibilities through a commercially successful business. And then right back to today and this meeting is demonstrated in this revised approach to the QBR. You're going to see greater accountability from senior executives for reporting out on BPA's commercial performance, delivering on our strategic objectives, and ensuring that that sense of accountability is shared across the agency. So I'm going to stop there, and of course, I really hope all of you have a chance to, as we all embark together on this strategic plan, to read the plan front to back, maybe more than once, really absorb it. We're going to be spending a lot of time today at our managers meeting starting to process what this plan means for BPA and what it means for all of our managers and for the organization. I once again just wanted to thank all of you for all of your contributions to helping us develop what I think are the right goals for BPA at this time. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over. We're going to move into reporting out. And I get the pleasure, before I hand it over to Mary, of reporting out on our safety KPI. And I feel privileged and pleased to note that safety will always be the first thing that we report out at the QBR. It is our #1 core value. It's the first starting point for all of our conversations in every one of our meetings. And right now, the incident frequency rate, which measures the number of injuries and illnesses per 200,000 hours worked, will be the prime target that we report out on. And for this year, although our long-term goal, of course, is and has to be 0 injuries at BPA, our goal for this year is an incident frequency rate of 1.2. And right now, we're in relatively good shape, reporting out at 1.0 here in the end of January 2018. So with that, I will pass it over to our Acting Chief Financial Officer, Mary Hawk.
All right. Thank you, Elliot, and good morning. So today, I'll be covering the agency's financial position and also the finance KPIs that Elliot has introduced. And then later this morning, both Joel and Richard will share some more detailed information on the power and the transmission expenses and revenues. So turning to slide 16, this is our first KPI, agency net revenues. And in all of our financial KPIs, we're comparing back to BP18 rate case. So on this chart, you can see the FCRPS, or Federal Columbia River Power System, net revenues. Currently, based on our first quarter forecast, we are expecting to end fiscal year 2018 with $297 million in net revenues. And you can see that that's higher than what we had reflected in the rate case. It's $271 million higher than what was in the rate case. And I'd like to take a moment and explain why our first quarter forecasted net revenues appear higher than the rate case. The rate case net revenues assume the interest savings from the regional cooperation debt, while actual financial results and the forecasted results reflect those savings as well. They also include the non-federal bond transactions. And therefore, the resulting higher net revenues shown in the forecast will be used to pay down the higher interest rate appropriated debt that we had anticipated in the rate case. And I'm going to say that one more time just to make sure it's really clear. So the rate case net revenues did assume the interest savings from the regional cooperation debt. And the forecast column that you see over to the right on this, the $297 million, also reflects those savings and the bond transactions to achieve those savings. So going to slide 16, this KPI breaks down our agency or FCRPS net revenues into total revenues and total expenses. So total expenses you see over to the left, those are defined as operations and maintenance, fish and wildlife, energy efficiency, depreciation, and interest. And as of the first quarter forecast, we expect to end the year with $3,323 million in total expenses for the agency. That includes both power and transmission. And that's $304 million under what we had in the rate case projection. And again, this is primarily driven by the debt management actions, including the regional cooperation debt that I had described earlier. The second KPI on this page to the right is total revenue, which is defined as the consolidation of both power and transmission revenues. And we anticipate ending the year $33 million under what was assumed in the BPA-18 rate case, and this is based on our first quarter forecast. This is primarily driven by power services and will be explained later by Joel. On the next slide, slide 18, we're showing our new KPI, days cash on hand. This indicates the number of days BPA can pay its operating expenses given the amount of financial reserves available. And days cash on hand is a common industry measure of cash liquidity. Besides days cash on hand, this graph also shows you our current financial reserves outlook. So if you go to the very last column, under agency, the bottom line, days cash on hand, you'll see that we are anticipating 60 days cash on hand as of the end of the fiscal year. This is 4 days less than what we had expected in the rate case. And this is due primarily to better than expected financial reserves for transmission services that balance out the lower expected reserves for power services. So as a reminder, when we established our financial reserves policy, we set a minimum level of 60 days on cash on hand, and that's what we are now forecasting to be at. The 60 days cash on hand equates to about $30 million for power and $100 million for transmission services. Now, if you look to the fourth column on this chart, under power, the forecast, and you go down to the third line, you'll see the reserves available for risk. And we're currently forecasting for power services that to be negative $42 million. So the negative $42 million then translates to a 72% probability of triggering a cost recovery adjustment clause, or a CRAC. And that CRAC would then go into effect in fiscal year 2019. So I want to really stress that BPA will be diligent about expenses. We will continue to look for cost management opportunities to offset this potential CRAC. But we may actually have to use this financial tool. Maintaining a minimum level of financial reserves is an important objective outlined in our strategic plan, and it's a critical element in supporting our credit ratings. We'll be discussing with you how we can build and maintain reserves in an upcoming public process this spring. Slide 19 shows our current borrowing authority position KPI. So this KPI tracks BPA's $7.7 billion borrowing authority cap, less the amount currently outstanding. So as of the end of December 31st, BPA has used $5 billion of the $7.7 million borrowing authority, leaving $2.7 available. And based on the projections from our BPA 18 rate filing, this will be depleted by 2023. And so BPA has set a target to maintain sufficient debt capacity on a rolling 10-year basis to ensure funding for our capital programs. This target includes preserving $1.5 billion of borrowing authority for contingencies that may be either operational or capital related. And that $1.5 million also includes the $750 million Treasury note that serves as a line of credit. And we're committed to hosting a debt management workshop prior to each rate case to discuss and to develop a 10-year capital financing plan to ensure this objective is met on an ongoing basis. Slide 20 shows a new KPI for us, debt-to-asset ratio, and Elliot had talked about this. The debt-to-asset ratio is a common industry measure of leverage. It's defined in our strategic plan as the proportion of BPA's revenue-generating assets that are financed through debt. And we are committed to tracking this metric for the agency and also by business line. So BPA is highly leveraged as of the end of 2017. And you can see from this table our current debt-to-asset ratio for the agency is 90%. Whereas compared to the industry average, that's 54%. So BPA's high debt-to-asset ratio is a result of us using debt to finance all of our capital investments historically. Also on this table, you can see that Power's debt-to-asset ratio is currently 99%. For transmission, the ratio is 80%. So as Elliot had mentioned, the strategic and financial plans set a goal to achieve a debt-to-asset ratio of 75 to 85% in 10 years, and then 60 to 70% in the long term. These goals will apply to both the agency and at each business line, power and transmission. And we're committing to a public process to develop a policy that will guide us on how we will meet these targets. So going to slide 21, I've talked about several public processes that we have planned for this fiscal year in 2018. These will be focused on maintaining and strengthening BPA's financial health. While we have outlined these commitments in the strategic plan that Elliot has described this morning, we're also committing to them in the 2018 financial plan. The 2018 financial plan is a very important companion piece to the strategic plan. And we're going to publish that plan on Tuesday, February 6th, so you want to watch for that. It will be on BPA's external website. In addition, BPA will be kicking off 2 of the financial public processes on Friday, March 2nd. We're going to start the day with a high-level industry panel that will set the landscape for the detailed workshop discussions. The panel will include a rating agency perspective, capital markets, and other industry perspectives. Also included in this day will be a workshop that will start the discussion on updating the financial reserves policy to determine how best to phase in the lower threshold for power services. We're going to close out the day with a workshop on evaluating and establishing debt utilization and debt capacity goals. And additional details are going to be coming out here in the coming weeks on that particular day, March 2nd, and the workshops that are going to occur on that day. So you'll be seeing those come out shortly, and we strongly encourage you to attend. So this concludes my finance overview for today. For those of you who are looking for more detailed financial information, the quarterly financial package, which is similar to the former QBR slide that many of you may remember, that is still available on BPA's Financial Overview webpage. And now I'm going to turn it over to Senior Vice President of Power Services, Joel Cook, who will provide more details on Power Services financials and also their initiatives.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. We are now on slide 23. For our first quarter, total operating expenses through December are $41 million, lower than the rate case expectation, which was $625 million, due in part to lower spending in several areas. The Corps of Engineers is underspent $5 million, Bureau of Reclamation $6 million, and our non-generating operations, otherwise known as Power's general and administrative expense, or our people costs, are under by $7 million. The largest savings, $23 million, is the result of the benefits of the regional cooperation debt transactions that Mary previously described, which lower the cost of our interest expense. Taking Q1 operating expenses to date into account, our end-of-year forecast total expenses are currently forecasted to be $133 million lower than the rate case, most of which is due to the effects of the regional cooperation debt and some additional miscellaneous reductions. Turning to the next slide, our operating revenues through December are $3 million higher than rate case expectations of $671 million, mainly due to higher secondary sales of $11 million, which was largely due to more surplus power and higher water supply. However, that gain was partially offset by lower loads. We also saw an increase in revenues from our industrial power, or DSI, customers. Taking Q1 operating revenues to date into account, our end-of-year forecast of operating revenues is $31 million less than the rate case, as shown in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. This is due to lower preference customer loads. Lower loads are the result of updated load requirements from our block customers, and some of these reductions are due to economic load loss, and some are based on updated load forecasts. As you would expect, some of the revenue loss from lower preference loads are being offset through higher projected secondary sales. In summary, although Power's actual net revenues through the first quarter are above rate case expectations, the net revenue forecast for the end of year of $300 million is trending lower than the $325 million net revenue target due to lower expected operating expenses. Turning to slide 25, Power's financial performance is closely tied to the water supply and market expectations. This graphic shows where the water comes from within the basin and the important areas where precipitation will impact our federal Columbia system. As you go down the river, the percentages indicated on the map are cumulative from the percentages upstream. So for example, at Grand Coulee, the 59% value there is a weighted average of the flows upstream. This next image shows snowpack conditions across the basin. The snowpack map shows the snow water equivalent percentages for the federal system are slightly above average, above Grand Coulee, and above average in northern Idaho and western Montana. Snowpack above Coulee is especially important because this is more storage in the form of higher elevation snow and river operations. Finally, the overall water supply at the Dalles is near average. However, precipitation has materialized in important areas previously mentioned that have bolstered federal generation above rate case expectations. Since the printing of these slides, snowpack levels have increased from the near average levels you see on the slide to 103% of average. The water supply forecast has also increased from the 98% you see on the slide to an average of about 104%. Moving on to market prices, the next two charts indicate how Power's rate case market price forecasts have performed against actual market performance and remaining outlook for the fiscal year. Actual natural gas prices are lower than rate case due to winter weather-related demand failing to materialize in November and December, as you can see on the chart. Further, LNG exports have not ramped up to expected levels that were assumed in the rate case. Looking forward, there's an expectation of continued production growth that will weigh on gas prices throughout 2018. As seen on the chart, January 2018 NYMEX contract shed about 70 cents per MMBTU in December with mild start to the winter, and production increased more than expected. Additional pipeline capacity has come online sooner than industry and rate case expectations, and they seem to have filled up with new production almost immediately. Turning now to slide 28, on-peak electric prices at the Mid-C on an annual average basis are trending below rate case expectations, mainly due to changes in water supply and lower natural gas prices. The majority of price variation seen between the rate case 18 or business plan 18 and the forward ICE prices are mainly due to differences in water supply shape. Electric prices are moving higher in May, mainly due to anticipated summer demand and actual water supply changes compared to the 80-year average shape that we use for the rate case. Moving on now to capital spend. This key performance indicator for capital expenditure tracks Power's total capital investment program for the year compared to the start of the year budget. We are developing a different metric that measures capital spend versus percentage of completion for future QBRs. Total Power capital expenditures through December are $50 million, with the end of year forecast at $267 million. Budget execution for Fed Hydro is currently at 108% of the Q1 target, which is $36 million spent against a rate case of $33 million. This represents about 20% total fiscal year budget. The largest expenditures for our Federal Hydro in 18 are Ice Harbor turbine runners, McNary station service replacement, Grand Coulee Firehouse, along with work at Grand Coulee on impellers, stators, cores, and rewinds on units 5 and 6. Hydro program spending is forecast to increase to $300 million by 2021 based off the 2016 IPR2 process. The next two slides discuss our plant's reliability. This key performance indicator for Fed Hydro is the forced outage factor, which reflects the percentage of hours the federal system is not available to run due to unplanned events. The target for fiscal year 18 is 5.9%, with actual performance through December at 3.6%. This is a good result with no new significant forced outages occurring in Q1. The next slide, the key performance indicator for Columbia Generation Station is availability factor, which captures the percentage of time CGS is available to serve demand. The target for FY18 is 94% or better. Performance through December is very close to the target at 93.5%. Looking forward, Power Services' main focus in the new strategic plan is to provide competitive products and services. Increasing the value of our clean energy through long-term sales is a key component to meeting Power's new strategic direction. Recently, we signed a significant deal with a regional IOU to sell capacity and energy over 5 years. We will continue to explore revenue-enhancing and cost-savings opportunities and look forward to sharing them with you at future quarterly business reviews. Now I'd like to turn it over to Richard Shaheen, our Senior Vice President of Transmission Services, who's going to give you an update on the transmission side.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Elliot, as well, and good morning to everyone on our call. Continuing our first quarter business report, I'll cover the transmission business line. I'll start off with a few fiscal slides, move into some reliability slides, and then wrap it up with a few topical area updates for transmission. My slides will be somewhat parallel to those that Joel went over for the Power business line by way of their depiction of our fiscal and reliability metrics. I'll start off moving to slide 33 for transmission services expense for fiscal year 18. This is our total expense depiction by month. Our total expense is made up primarily of our internal operating costs, our transmission-related BPA costs, as well as our debt service costs. What you're looking at on the chart on the right-hand scale is in millions of dollars. Each month has our BP18 rate case forecast, with the first 3 months depicting our actuals in the darker bar. For the first quarter of fiscal year 18, we had a total expense of $233 million, which is approximately 22% of our full year BP18 rate case figure, which you'll find in the upper right-hand box on this slide, $1,043 million. Our end of first quarter, end of year forecast is slightly above that at $1,048 million, $5 million above the rate case figure. Although slightly above the rate case figure, our projections are that we will come in right or below the target for our total full year expense. Moving on to the next slide, slide 34. This is a depiction of our transmission services fiscal year 18 total revenues. Again, on the right-hand scale, showing millions of dollars, with each month showing a projection for our full year. The darker bars show our actuals for the first 3 months of the year, and they sum to $262 million, which is approximately 25% of our BP18 rate case full year figure, which again you'll find in the right-hand corner box of $1,052 million for the full year. Our end of year forecast at the end of the first quarter is $1,054 million against that rate case figure, which puts us approximately right at the rate case figure, and we expect revenues to trend along the way throughout the year towards that figure. Moving on to the next slide, this is our transmission services capital, and there's actually 2 things that are depicted in this slide. One is our capital spend, and one is a units installed, which essentially describes our work plan for the year. First, let me go over the capital spend, which is on the left-hand side of this chart in hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first 3 months of this year, we are at $103 million total spend, which is approximately 23% of our full year plan of $441 million spend. So at 25% of the year, we have a 23% spend. Moving to the right side of the chart, it shows our work plan progress. A total of 419 units comprise our plan, and as we sit at the end of the first quarter, we have completed 125 of those units. So we're about 30% complete with our full year plan, with 25% of the year behind us, and a spend of 23% of the full year budget. This puts us on target for meeting our obligation both in work plan as well as capital spend. Moving on to the next slide, the next couple slides, are performance metrics for transmission reliability. The first one, SAIDI, which is an industry standard measure, is our System Average Interruption Duration Index. This is a measure of average minutes per outage. For our transmission grid at BPA, we track this in 2 parts of our grid, the low voltage, less than 200 kV, and the high voltage, greater than 200 kV. We also have on this chart dashed lines which depict warning levels. These are based on historical performance within the transmission BPA grid, and they are not to exceed levels. Down is good on this chart. For the end of the first quarter, we only have 1 data point. This index, as well as the next, are measured on a quarterly basis. As we progress through the year and as we carry these QBRs forward, we'll add quarterly results, and these dots will then turn into line charts so you can see trending throughout the year. For our low voltage, we are at 150 minutes, and for our high voltage, we're at 129 minutes. Both results better than our warning limits, and we expect that trend to continue throughout the remainder of the year. Moving on to the next slide, slide 37, we have our other main reliability metric, which is SAFE. Again, an industry standard measure standing for System Average Interruption Frequency Index. This is the average number of outages throughout the year, unplanned outages. Again, we track it in two forms, both in low voltage, less than 200 kV, part of the grid, and high voltage, greater than 200 kV, parts of the grid. And as before, we have dashed lines showing our warning levels based on historical performance for both measures. For our high voltage, you can see we came in at 0.27. However, our low voltage is slightly above our warning limit at 0.74, with the warning limit being at 0.66. While this is currently above our warning limit, we expect the ups and downs through the year to level out and put us underneath our warning limit, delivering a performance better than our historical expectations. We had some pretty nasty weather in ice and wind in December, but it's still early in the year, and we expect the recovery of this to achieve the performance levels that we expect in reliability. Moving into my final slide, I want to give an update on a few key topical areas within transmission. First, let me speak of reliability coordination. I'll provide a brief overview and on each of these four. Starting with reliability coordination, NERC requires that all utilities functioning as a balancing authority or as a transmission operator obtain reliability coordination services. Currently, BPA partially funds and receives these services from Peak Reliability. On January 2nd, the California Independent System Operator, CAISO, announced that it would withdraw as a funding party for reliability coordinator services from Peak by September of 2019. CAISO also announced it would begin offering its own reliability coordinator services within its balancing authority area in May of 2019 and to other balancing authorities and transmission operators in September of 2019. Reliability is a key component of Bonneville's mission. How we proceed will impact how we serve our customers. BPA will coordinate with other funding parties and Peak during CAISO's withdrawal process to help ensure that the interconnected grid reliability and system security remain a principal focus and priority for the Western Interconnection. BPA will also work with key stakeholders and customers to determine what options make sense for BPA going forward to deliver continued reliability and focus on the greatest benefits and value to our customers and the region. We held a customer meeting last week to discuss BPA's objectives and options. There was good participation and dialogue that will help BPA as we navigate forward. Meeting transmission customer needs includes maintaining reliability, which is the highest objective as BPA considers possible alternatives moving forward. Next, let me touch on the next topical area of transmission tariff engagement. BPA has been implementing our new transmission business model. Elliot alluded to this as our transmission of tomorrow, under which we will offer standardized products and services that are aligned with the pro forma tariff and industry standards. BPA has determined that seeking FERC approval for changes to our tariff is no longer a tenable approach, particularly as we look to modernize operations and better meet customers' needs. We recently announced a couple weeks ago in early January we would conduct a public process to set terms and conditions for transmission service aligned with the goals of our transmission business model. We will use a hearing under the Section 212 of the Federal Power Act, which is unique to BPA. The 212 hearing follows the same process that BPA uses to establish rates. BPA will run the hearing concurrently with the next rate case, which will begin in fall of 2018. Next, pro forma gap analysis, also a component of the transmission business model. We ran a series of customer workshops last year to get feedback on a number of areas that we want to feed into the tariff efforts. We'll be announcing an updated schedule of customer meetings to provide updates and share progress with customers through this summer. Those meetings will be on the BPA calendar and the Transmission Business Model website. And lastly, the last topical area to touch on, the Transmission Study and Expansion Process, T-STEP. Being responsive to requests for long-term service across our network continues to be a challenge in a time of limited transmission capacity and limited capital budgets. We will be moving forward with the engineering and environmental phases of the 2016 T-STEP, as well as setting the stage for the 2018 T-STEP. That concludes my update, as well as today's update from the business lines. Transmission is committed, as it states in the strategy, and Elliot stated earlier, to be continuing to be and improving upon being a dependable and responsive business partner to the region, and we look forward to the collaborative efforts moving forward. Now I'd like to turn it over to our Deputy Administrator, Dan James, who is going to provide a brief update on the spill surcharge. Dan?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. We have just a few minutes left to go. We're now on slide 40. I'm able to give you a very brief update on the spill surcharge. It's an important unresolved issue related to the BP18 rate case. BPA incorporated the spill surcharge into BP18 to recover the costs associated with an increase in fish passage spill as a result of the spring 2017 spill injunction ruling by the U.S. District Court of Oregon. As you know, the court ordered increased spill at 8 FCRPS dams on the Lower Columbia and Snake Rivers for the 2018 spring fish passage season. The cost implications of this ruling were not known at the time we set the rates in July 2017, so BPA adopted the surcharge. The spill surcharge adjusts non-sliced power rates to recover the cost or lost revenue associated with the increased spill and lost generation relative to the spill assumptions used when setting rates. The federal agencies appealed the district court's spill ruling to the Ninth Circuit. The appeals court agreed to review this case on an expedited basis and is expected to hold a hearing before spring spill season begins. Unfortunately, we're not at liberty to discuss the spill surcharge further at this time due to active litigation. We are committed to keeping the region informed, and as we have developments that could be shared, we will use this forum and other public processes. We appreciate your patience and understanding. Moving to slide 41, I'd like to give a brief update on the CRSO EIS. As most of you know, BPA is working with the other action agencies, which are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation, on the Columbia River System Operation, or CRSO, Environmental Impact Statement. We're in the alternatives development phase, which will lead up to the development of a draft EIS in 2021. We expect to publish the CRSO newsletter in early February and some updates on the progress of developing the EIS. Stay tuned for more opportunities for public engagement throughout the year. And I would encourage you to go to the website that is on your screen, crso.info, for more information and to sign up to receive updates. Now I'll turn it back over to our colleague, Scott Sims, Director of Communications at BPA.
Thank you very much, Dan. Before we take questions, we wanted to make sure that we get a few reminders out about the upcoming opportunities to engage with Bonneville. Certainly you've heard about some of those today, and we know that it can be tough to keep up with all that's happening here at BPA. You can track all of our public processes at bpa.gov, but we will go ahead and give you a roundup of what's coming in the days, weeks, and months ahead. First, Transmission is hosting a workshop February 2nd to discuss waiving real power loss return obligations during oversupply conditions. BPA is revising its rules of procedure for the upcoming BP20 rate case and tariff proceeding that will take place on the same schedule. And Richard had already mentioned the T-STEP closeout on February 22nd. Mary also mentioned the Strengthening Financial Health Public Process workshops on March 2nd. As well, Elliot mentioned the revamped Integrated Program Review, or IPR. The save the date for the IPR workshops is June 18 to 22. As we have more information about the schedule, we'll share those details. For the Mary's Peak Communications Site upgrade, Bonneville has come back to the communities of Corvallis and Philomath, Oregon with some new alternatives based on feedback we received during the first round of scoping. The comment closes February 21. We're also accepting comments on a wildlife habitat stewardship and restoration agreement for Albany Falls Dam in Idaho through February 23rd. BPA is proposing to fund the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership proposal to restore floodplain connectivity to the Columbia River. This is within the Stegerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge in Clark County, Washington. We've published a draft environmental assessment and are accepting comments through February 26th. So that concludes the presentation portion of today's QBR. We'll now begin taking your questions. We will be reading the questions from individuals who submitted them today during this forum. As a reminder, you can still submit questions by clicking the chat button on the upper right-hand part of your screen if you're part of the WebEx presentation. Enter your question and press send. As well, we cannot answer questions on the spill surcharge at this time because the spill injunction is currently in litigation. So let's start with our first question. Our first question came in on the topic of finance for Mary Hawken, and the question is from Ron asking, has BPA officially changed the Treasury payment probability target from 95% to 97.5%?
BPA has not changed our Treasury payment probability target, so the very short answer is no. And to explain a little further, the 95% probability target is over 2 consecutive years, and then that 95% translates into a 97.5% for 1 year, but we have not changed our target.
Great, thank you very much, Mary. The next question comes on the topic of power. Can Joel discuss what BPA is doing to hedge forward to capture the June through August variances in the mid-C prices?
Thanks, Scott. I won't discuss specific transactions. However, we are currently working through a process internally to identify and propose changes to our risk management policy. One of the objectives of this is to increase our ability to hedge financially out 3 and possibly as much as 5 years, consistent with our business plan. Currently, we are limited to 6 months. This, among other changes, will be important to managing the price volatility within our secondary sales.
Great. Thank you very much, Joel. Our next question comes on the topic of transmission. For Richard Shaheen, the question is, does the stated capital expenditure include customer financial projects?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so slide 35 noted that we had spent $103 million in the first quarter of the year versus a total capital plan of $441 million. Those figures do not include the customer finance projects. Those customer finance projects, while worked internal through our own resources and oversight and plan of action with engineering and construction, the numbers depicted in our capital metric do not include those dollars from the customers that finance those projects.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Another question from the WebEx is, does BPA anticipate another run to privatize?
Well, this is Elliot. I assume I'll take that question, Scott. Certainly, I think in the current political environment, we've continued to see proposals to potentially monetize or sell off our transmission assets. This is a proposal that we've seen over the years. I think it's probably the 3rd or 4th time. At this point, we're watching the proposal carefully, engaging when asked, but not taking any other specific actions at this point to respond to it.
Great. Thank you very much, Elliot. The next question we have is for Joel Cook, and this is the underspend by the Corps and the Bureau that you mentioned expected to persist to the end of the year, or is it transitory? Excuse me.
So my expectation was, will it be transitory? However, if you look at our past histories, we tend to underspend a little bit by the time we complete the year, but we tend to get a little bit of a slower start. So I would expect it to be close to expectations, but slightly under.
Great. Thank you very much, Joel. Next question is just a quick reminder or restate on the crack threshold for power. Mary, do you want to take that?
Yeah, the crack threshold is based on the accumulated calibrated net revenue calculation from rates, and roughly you can look at the reserves for risk for power and when it reaches 0 or below 0, that would be an indication of the crack triggering.
Okay, thank you, Mary. This one is one that a couple folks here at this table can answer, and that is, can you comment on the status of BPA's efforts to develop new flexibility products to increase revenues? Do you want to start off with that, Elliot, or do you want Joel?
I'm going to let Joel take it. He's right in the middle of it.
So our big part of our focus has been to try to find opportunities to increase the value of the capacity that our federal system has and can deliver to the region. Most recently, we spent time working on day-ahead capacity type products, and we believe that will be a continuing opportunity to add additional revenue in the foreseeable future.
I will just add one thing on top of that. Something that's been particularly interesting is we know that late last year, the California Independent System Operator has advanced a proposal for establishing a day-ahead flexible capacity product that would ultimately allow for generators to be compensated for providing reliability and flexibility to help California with the duck curve issue and address some of the missing money and capacity issues at play in the West. So that's something that we'll also stay very engaged with other players in the Northwest on, and are quite encouraged to see that development.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next question is, why are power reserves down from last year when expenses are down by $133 million and revenues are only down by $31 million from the rate case? And I believe Mary Hawkins is going to answer this one.
The majority of the reduction in power expenses is due to the debt management actions that I had described earlier, the regional cooperation debt, and the reserves generated from those debt management actions will be used to pay down higher interest appropriated debt, and that will generate interest savings that will appear on the power income statement consistent with our rate case forecast. So the reduction in power reserves that you're seeing is mostly due to the reduction on the revenue side that Joel had described.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. We currently do not have any additional questions in the queue. We'll wait just a brief moment for any others to queue up before we determine to close out the call. Okay, we have one additional question. On all of the above strategy on debt capacity, slide 8, does that include revenue financing?
That is part of the all of the above strategy that Elliot had described, and you'll see described in the strategic plan, yes. Great,
thank you very much. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the question and answer session today. We really appreciate all of those questions that were asked into the forum. If you were unable to get your question in today, please send it to communications@bpa.gov. Again, that's communications@bpa.gov. Questions already submitted via today's WebEx do not need to be resubmitted. We will be posting follow-up answers to all of these questions on the QBR webpage in the coming weeks, along with a recording of today's meeting. And now for a final word from Elliot.
Well, first, again, I'd just like to thank everybody who's involved in pulling this session together, and then all of the customers participating and others. Really do appreciate your time. I'll certainly look forward to your feedback on the format, the effectiveness of the meeting. Of course, we're always committed to continuous improvement here at Bonneville, and certainly hope this is a good starting point. I just wanted to leave all of you with one final thought, and that's something that we note on page 8 of the plan. And that is that while we're embarking on this 5-year strategic plan in a very focused and purposeful manner, we're going to also continue to engage our customers in the region on the longer-term issues facing Bonneville, including legal, environmental, economic, and power supply risks. BPA is definitely going to need the collaboration and support of a broad range of interests to sustain its role as an engine of the Northwest economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. And just wanted to assure you all that you have a great partner here and collaborator and working together on these really important issues. So thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.